Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. This summer, Wisden are proudly sponsored by Kia UK. Kia are leading the way in electrification with their groundbreaking range of EVs, including the EV9, EV6 and the UK Car of the Year, the EV3. Kia also have a commitment to movement that inspires and want to help cricket fans get closer to the action. Listen every week for Kia's Movement That Inspires moment for chances to win exciting experiences at the Kia Oval this summer. South Africa are world test champions. After coming so close so many times, the Proteas finally have their moment in the sun. Australia themselves had their moments at Lords, but Temba Bavuma's team kept fighting back. Aiden Markram with a fourth innings 100 for the ages, and the champion bowler Kagiso Rabada with 9 wickets in the game, leading the attack from the front in style. This is an extra weekly episode. We will be back with our England-India preview on Wednesday, but today you'll hear from me, Yas Rana, and in part 1, Mark Butcher, and then in part 2, the South African cricket journalist Dan Gallan and pod regular Ben Gardner. But South Africa have waited so long for this moment. They've finally done it. A very, very special finish at Lords.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. If you're honest as well, you would say that if you were going to pick them for an ICC title, it wouldn't necessarily have been the World Test Championship. World T20, 50 over World Cup, which is not to say that in the past, when South Africa have been number one Test sides in the world, going back 10, 15 years or something, but that was before the World Test Championship existed. So right now it is not only a very sweet moment for them, but also a slightly unexpected one. Win 8 Test matches on the bounce, regardless of whatever your opposition was leading up to that, is some stunning achievement. And then to beat an Australian team who everybody had as favourites. I suspect South Africa probably had them as favourites before the start. In what turned out to be sort of a one inning shootout in the end, is a pretty incredible achievement. On the back of one incredible player in Kagiso Rabada, really. 9 for, unfortunate didn't get 10. I'm still not quite 100% sure that he shouldn't have been player of the match, despite Markram's efforts in that final innings, because without Rabada keeping the game level-ish, or at least keeping Australia within sight, then that innings wouldn't have been possible. So that's one of those, you toss up your player of the match preferences either way. But what an incredible achievement! What a place to do it with Bavuma as captain. The whole thing's something of a fairy tale for a nation that's been through it when it comes to winning titles in ICC tournaments.
What makes Rabada so good? His career record is extraordinary. There have been lots of comparisons between him and Cummins before the game. They have very, very similar overall career records. And the thing that really stands out with Rabada is that strike rate, which is as low as anyone in the last 100 years of Test cricket. What makes him so effective? Because he's not quite as quick as he was 5-6 years ago.
Well, listen, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, when you're comparing sort of the best bowlers of the era, what sort of makes him stand out strike rate wise above and beyond somebody like Cummins or any of the great ones? There is something in his action which is it looks wonderful and smooth and mechanical, but there must be something in terms of facing him that makes him kind of jump you a little bit, sort of catch you a little bit unawares. But also he bowls an enormous amount of kind of like attacking deliveries, not really that interested in building up pressure or building up dots. The fact that he's good enough to kind of do that as well as bowl lots of deliveries that are challenging in terms of wicket taking is testament to his skill, really. Brilliant slip cord. They very rarely drop anything. Batters who don't defend particularly well, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I wonder on that we're in the era of the wobble seam, and Rabada definitely has that in his locker, but he also does try and genuinely swing the ball as well. So he just has more ways of attacking you than most bowlers in the modern game.
dependent on what the state of either pitch conditions, overhead conditions, or ball conditions are. He's in the game most of the time, all of the time. So I mean, look, he's just one of those outstanding, once in a generation bowlers. I mean, you've got Bumrah at the moment, you've got Cummins at the moment, and you've got him, and I think we were probably saying in terms of a preview for the England series coming up that Bumrah is good enough to win a series by himself. Rabada's another one exactly the same.
Can you make sense of how the game unfolded? 28 wickets. 28 wickets fell on the opening 2 days, and then just 6 in the remaining day and a half. Why was it such a dramatic change in... Actually, was it such a dramatic change in the conditions that led to a dramatic change in how the cricket was played out?
Well, I mean, it appeared as though that there was plenty happening on day one. Both day one and day two. 14 wickets fell in both. I think you've also got two teams that haven't played a great deal of Test match cricket for a while, and you ally that with overheads, which is why Bavuma decided that he was going to bowl first. I mean, that could have backfired spectacularly, couldn't it? And given that they gave away 70 odd lead in the first innings, you would imagine that they're doomed. Australia being the sort of like the kings of the third innings of a Test match when they've got their noses in front. So you're thinking at that point, South Africa are completely out of this. But for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why this is, but for some reason it looked as though it was impossible to make any runs on those first 2 days, despite the fact that sort of like the stats in terms of movement are saying that it wasn't wildly different from any other time. I think the sort of like the low bounce at times was a bit of a problem. It wasn't a great. I don't think it was a great Test pitch. I don't think it can be if you're going to lose 28 wickets on the first 2 days. But I do think there was a certain amount of hesitancy batting wise. Australia's batting lineup with trying to put round pegs in square holes or whatever over the course of it and the build up, doing everything they can not to pick Constas, who's an opener by trade, and filling that gap with Marnus and the rest of it. Khawaja struggling for any sort of fluency and form, and on a surface whereby if you invited the bowlers onto you, i.e. weren't willing to kind of throw a punch back at them, then they could very easily just hold you steady until something happened. Made it very, very tricky. And I suppose having the jeopardy of a one-off Test match where it's winner take all, there's a lot of pressure there that isn't there on during the normal course of things in Test matches. Fine, you get a decider at the back end of a 5-test series and you have a very similar set of situations. But on this one, you've had no run up whatsoever. You're just in. And if you end up in a surface that is slightly tricky, something that's going to give the bowlers an advantage, then you end up with the type of match that you get. But I'm stunned by the fact that, having got their noses in front, Australia didn't go on and bury South Africa there, and that's just testament to the excellence of Rabada and Ngidi for that spell as well at the back end of day 3.
Yeah, and end of day 2, that Ngidi spell.
Sorry, yeah,
when
day 2.
They lost 5 wickets for 29. And Ngidi was a question mark as to whether he get picked in the first place going into the Test match. So a huge spell from him. And I think another factor here is that this is a relatively early summer Test match, and as you say, 2 teams who haven't played a lot of cricket, so conditions aren't necessarily what you might see at the end of July or in August in a Test series in England. And there are a couple of scorecards doing the round in the Cricket Journo WhatsApp groups, Butch. There was a game between Kent and Middlesex earlier this season that played out in quite a similar way. So on day 1, Kent were bowled out for 129. Day 2, second innings, Middlesex bowled out for 238. Then Kent hit 4-7-3 in the third innings. Middlesex then chased down 3-6-6, 8 down. And I think when the pitch is quite slow and you've got overhead conditions, it can be lethal, especially as you say with a low bounce. But when the sun comes out and it gets even slower, it can be really hard to take wickets. It can be really, really hard. Edges just weren't carrying. We saw Steve Smith go off with a horror finger injury. He was standing so close. He was, for a lot of that South Africa 4th innings, first slip was standing closer than the keeper. And it's very, very hard to generate wicket taking opportunities when there's that lack of pace in the wicket.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to Steve Finn on the radio. I did past thousands of miles this week, so I was in the car listening on the radio. Talking about the different way in which they've sort of been preparing pitches at Lords, and it had always been the case. Famously, Shane Warne never took Fifer at Lords. It had always been the case whereby the pitches actually kind of got slightly quicker and bouncier as a Test match went on, as opposed to the other way around. But what seems to have happened here is, and Finney was talking about sort of like a different style of rolling, not compacting the pitches quite so much, and leaving more grass on. If the pitch isn't sort of getting harder and sort of more bouncy as the game goes through, but gets flatter, then it just kind of takes all of the fun out of it for everybody, as far as I'm concerned. Not that South Africa were complaining at the back end. But there is something, the Lord's pitches have genuinely done this. They've kind of got better as games have gone on. But I'm not sure that I don't remember them sort of getting to a point whereby bowlers like Cummins and Stark couldn't get the ball to carry through to the keeper. And bearing in mind that the game was over in, very, very early part of day 4. Something not great about it. And I'm sure that, I haven't read anything saying that the Aussies were not particularly happy, or South Africa would be happy with whatever happened with the surface, because they're all too smart to go down that road. But I'd have been pretty disappointed, I think, as a neutral to have watched cricket on that, or to have paid to watch cricket on that, I should say.
Even though the pitch did slow down and potentially flat out towards the end, Australia did let the game drift, because as hard as it was to take wickets, it was also quite hard to score runs and score boundaries. And there was a slightly odd period towards the end of day 3 where South Africa weren't scoring any boundaries, but they were going at 3.5, 4 runs and over with Bavuma and Markram, in Bavuma hobbling throughout his innings. And it felt like Australia, I don't know, were quite passive, I thought.
Yeah. Again, sort of like the suspicion. It was described on the radio as sort of like, how South Africa had gone about. How Australia had gone about trying to keep England quiet during the series in 2023, putting sweepers back and all that kind of stuff. Which I'm kind of sitting there thinking, but South Africa aren't England. They're not coming at you. They're not trying to smash you everywhere. That this is a great situation, particularly for a team that has a sort of a history of buckling when things have got tight and when the pressure has been on, just to kind of get everybody within the circle, kind of make them have to hit it over the top to score. But as you said, a period went by of probably about 2 hours. The 2 hours it took me to get from London down to Bristol, whereby it seemed as though nothing was happening in the game. The scoreboard was just revolving over. But there didn't seem to be any pressure exerted whatsoever from Cummins. Lyon couldn't keep him quiet. And the game just seemed to drift. It was like suddenly it turned into an afternoon at a benefit game, whereby everyone was just kind of happy and more interested in the Pims and everything else, which was so odd. The lack of sort of instinct from Cummins and from all of those senior Australian players to kind of go, you know what, this moment right here is it. We've got to strangle the hell out of these guys. We've got to put them under every single pressure just to get one. And then maybe on a pitch whereby, things have got very difficult for us to make something happen, you make it happen by dint of, psychological pressure. Didn't seem to happen. By the time they realised it, it was too late. South Africa had the finishing line in sight with 2 down, and the game was up.
You mentioned the Australian batting order. We often talk about England mixing things up and putting players in positions they're not necessarily that familiar with. And actually, to be fair to England, it actually works more often than not. But more generally, when you see Labuschagne being moved up for a final, Green batting 3 just for a final, positions these guys don't bat in, either in domestic cricket or international cricket. What did you make of that? It felt like they were picking the names first, and then everything from there followed.
Well, there's been quite a long history of that with Australia, hasn't there? With Steve Smith having a go at opening, and sort of like the reluctance to trust the next generation of batters coming through from Shield cricket, which has been very unusual for Australia, really. And I think they're paying for it. I think actually what's happened is they've probably realised that now's the time to stop with all this nonsense and start trusting the young guys that are waiting in the wings. Stop moving the likes of Labuschagne. If Labuschagne isn't good enough to hold his spot down at number 4, then we move on and get somebody else in. Same with Kawaja. So they might actually have had that dawning and realization prior to the Ashes rather than during it, which is perhaps not a great thing for us. But yeah, it's been interesting to see Australian cricket kind of fudge decisions in that way. It's not something that they've historically done. And also, you sort of mentioned England placing people in positions that they've not done before, but generally they've done it with people who haven't made a name for themselves, cemented themselves in a position in a test team. They're kind of new to everything, so if you're going to start them off in a place that's unusual to them, that's probably better than moving guys around who have been number 4s forever, suddenly trying to turn themselves into openers, or number 7s trying to turn themselves into number 3, as in the case of Cam Green or whatever. So it's all good. There's a bit of confusion knocking around, and more than anything else, I think if you're going to ask who would you rather see win the World Test Championship from an English point of view, then I guess you'd have said South Africa.
Really?
I think so. I think so. But I mean, it's a tough call. It's like having to choose between your kids, or the one that you didn't like the most.
I think it was pretty clear cut watching it. I know there are a lot of South Africans in the ground, but yeah, I don't think the noise for South Africa was coming just from South Africans. Let's put it that way.
No, absolutely. I mean, and look, the beauty of being able to watch a game like that without having any skin in it is that you just generally want the team who played the best cricket to win, and I think in the end that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it for part 1. Cheers, Butch. Dan, 2 days on from the final, how does it feel?
Yeah. Hey guys. I don't know. I still don't quite know. I feel a mix of joy and relief and confusion, and it's just so good. I haven't stopped smiling. I haven't stopped feeling amazing. I feel like I'm exhausted. Tired is how I'm feeling. It's just so good.
I mean, amazing scenes at Lord's on the final day. Ben Ashwell Prince leading the Bavuma chant in the dressing room. Keshav Maharaj's emotional chat with Graham Smith. Aiden Markram necking a pint on the outfield with an old mate. Half of southwest London seemed to be in the ground as well. It looked like a totally joyous occasion.
Yeah, I mean, half of southwest London, but crucially, 75% of them at least, South African or supporting South Africa, but South African, like wearing South Africa shirts, not just anyone but Aussies. These were proper fans, and they kept the party going all afternoon as well. Cash and I doing the daily pod on the Patreon that day, little plug for the Patreon, and we thought we'd leave it a bit to see if it would quieten down. And after about 3 hours, we were like, okay, we're going to have to go and do this at some point. And then we got out there, and there was still just like packed out the grounds, packed out the bars. I think Lords was pretty glad it went as far as it did. But yeah, amazing atmosphere. Yeah, chance of for Temba Bavuma and Aiden Markram kind of throughout the game, not just in that final sort of that final afternoon, or the final afternoon before the final morning. That was obviously when it was loudest. Just an amazing occasion throughout, and obviously an amazing game of cricket. And I think obviously questions about South Africa that was the thing they were most keen, I think, to say after the game was, look, we were questioning the build up to this final. There can be no questioning of us now. That's definitely true because of the caliber of the opponent they beat. But I think just because of how the game played out as like a proper epic, I think there were some questions about how this would feel for South Africa compared to, say, a World Cup win, because it has been sort of, it is in some ways a one-off game at the end of a slightly odd cycle. But I think just because of how that game played out, you almost forgot about all of that before, and it felt just like a because it's such an epic in itself that the occasion just felt like it would have done, I think, winning a World Cup title, basically. Like that was the most similar feeling I could think was, obviously wasn't quite the drama at the very last moment. There was a weird sort of ending with Carl Verena trying to get it done before lunch. But like the emotions felt similar to Lord's 2019 for the World Cup final, basically. And so I think that this feels almost more than any other World Test Championship final, like a proper world title and a proper staging post for that team, I think.
Dan, I was trying to work out which bit of the game I felt, looking back on it, was the key passage, because there were so many. It felt like Australia were ahead pretty much all the way through until, I suppose, that third evening. But if you were to pick out, going back all the way back to day one key moment where without that, it's dead, or South Africa don't have a hope in hell, what would you say is the moment that changed things to South Africa, that gave them a bit of hope?
I think Smith nicking off Markram in that first innings, because Smith looked immovable. I mean, he was bang on for 100. And I know Webster kind of scratched his way to 70, but if Smith carries on going, maybe Webster carries on with him and they both get tons. The tail isn't exposed. They certainly bat for the rest of the day. They maybe bat into the morning. Conditions, as Australia showed on day 2, even in the afternoon and the evening sessions, were still difficult to bat on. So South Africa could have still been bowled out for a really low score, but instead of only having a lead of 100 or whatever it was for Australia, or less than 100, they lead by 200, 250, and that's the game. I mean, if Smith goes on and makes a big ton, that's probably the game. So if there's one moment, it's probably Smith inexplicably chasing a wide one from the bowler who was only on to allow Veer Mulder a change of ends. That is the only reason why Aiden, that wasn't a tactic. That wasn't because Temba Bavuma saw something in the pitch or backed Markram to get a wicket. He was just on to rattle through 6 quick balls so Veer Mulder could change ends. And then Smith chases a wide one and he nicks off. But as Ben said, it was such a good game. I mean, there were so many moments. I mean, up until that, South Africa had lost when they limped to the close on day 1 at 40 for nothing, 40 for 4 rather, nothing for 4, I should say. They had the game lost. When Marnus and Smith were batting again together, and then Marnus chases a wide one. Before then, I thought they had the game lost. Before Ngidi channels the spirits of Stuart Broad, South Africa had the game lost. Even when Stark was leaning on Rabada and Ngidi and making them look like medium paces, I wasn't familiar with how Lords flattens out on day 3 and 4. It felt, at least the energy felt like they had the game lost. Chasing 280 felt like 50 runs too many. So that they hung in there, that they carried on showing the fight, that they made a game of it, is a testament to the players. And yeah, look, let's be honest as well. Australia let that slip on several occasions. South Africa snatched back victory from the jaws of defeat, but Australia should have buried them a couple of times. But if you ask me for one key moment, it's Smith involved twice, right? It's that or dropping the catch of Bavuma when he's on 6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Australia were 146 for 4 when Smith departs. Smith's on 66. He looks $1 million, looks, as Dan says, looks very well set to get 100 that would have probably batted South Africa out of the game, even though that was only the first innings. And then there's a proper collapse at the end of that Australia first innings. 192 for 5 becomes 212 all out. And then again, as Dan says, South Africa in that first morning, 40 odd for 4, and it feels like 212 is a long way away. And although, Ben, they only get to 138, you want to pick out one moment on day 2 in the South Africa batting first innings that, even though they were still a long way behind in the game, it changed how they approached the game.
Yeah, well, one moment or that first kind of hour really, and especially the batting from Bavuma, who by the end was sort of carrying Bedingham along with him, but it was really him who sat out the stall. I mean, so he had barely played I don't think he had played a shot really on the first evening. As I guess, I don't know, maybe South Africa might look back and think, well, we had to just get to the close with whatever we could sort of intact. And, if we'd been 6-7 down, that would have been the game lost. But I think they probably got back to the dressing room and thought, we need to somehow land a blow back here, because that Australia attack looked kind of unhittable, but they also, Markram had tried to play a shot in the first over, or at least pushed at one he could have left and been bowled. Rickleton had played a few drives and then played one more and then got out, and then Mulder just completely sort of just dead battered it. And then you get to that second morning, and Bavuma tries to attack the first two balls he faces from Stark. I think he mistimes the first, misses the second altogether. But then the first ball of the next over plays this brilliant lofted cover drive, and then he's kind of away. He's then, it's not just Stark he's hitting, who sometimes you can hit Stark. He's playing shots off Hazelwood and off Cummins, and then the last over before drinks, I think, is when he hooks Cummins into the grandstand. You're like, wow, this is great. There's a partnership building here, and then he gets out not long after, and then they're all out, and it's a lead of 70 odd. You're like, okay, that probably still is the game, but he had shown at least, I think, that you actually could attack these Australian bowlers, and that they're what they are, human. That there was a way to score against them. So I think that was really important. I think then you saw that in the second innings. It wasn't exactly that they counter-attacked. I think they did just play pretty normally, basically. And obviously, there's lots that went into that. Australia being a bit flat, the conditions changing, but also I think there was just a mindset change. And I actually was reminded, Dan, of what you were telling us in the pod before the final about what Conrad, the coach, said at the close of that Boxing Day test against Pakistan, when he said, "Do you want to be the guys that stood up when your country needed you, or do you want to be the guys that choked?" And it felt like on the first evening they were the guys who were choking, and then from then on, Bavuma, Markram, Rabada, and Ngidi again were the guys who stood up when their country needed them. And also, actually, one moment Dan hasn't mentioned in the turning points, and I think because at the time it felt like it had come too late still, was because Australia was 73 for 7 in that second innings, and then put together a partnership between Carey and Stark, it would have been. And that at first you're thinking like, well, that's just taken out of range, basically. Like, they needed to keep them to 220, not going to chase more than that. And then Rabada strikes twice then, but it still feels like it's too late. But actually, what we'd seen at the end of that second day was the pitch already easing up a bit, that we then saw even more the next day. And then actually, they then take it quite easy. But so those 2 wickets, actually, if he hadn't taken those, it could easily be that Australia get up to, 250 in that innings, because Carey goes on to make 80, Stark makes what he still makes, and then all of a sudden that game really is out of reach. As it was that double strike, I think, also with an old ball on a pitch that wasn't really doing much, getting out a set, and it's Carey in particular, that was a really crucial moment that I think, as well as his first innings, Nooble wickets shouldn't go underestimated, I think.
It's amazing how a game, a sports event that lasts over 1,000 balls. I don't know exactly how many balls a test match lasts, but over 1,000. And it's amazing how one or two can, even if they are inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, can really shift the tone of the narrative. And that I was sitting in the stands for both of them. I spent quite a lot of those tests in the stands. And the Bavuma cover drive, lofted cover drive was over Stark. That totally shifted the energy. It did dispel this assumption that you can't hit these Australians. They're too good. The South African batters aren't good enough. But Bavuma bends his back knee and he launched an inside-out cover drive. Well, not quite inside out, but over the top of the infield, and it comes straight out of the middle of the bat. And you're thinking, yeah, your Oaks can play. Play your shots. And the second one was in the very first inning, the very first ball or second ball of South Africa's run chase, when already 280 does feel like a lot. But late in the first evening, Stark and Hazelwood and Cummins were unplayable, and even the forward defenses from the South Africans felt like there was a lot of jeopardy. But that first over Stark bowls, and Rickleton and Markram both just lean on Stark and hit him. Don't just block him and bunt him, but actually like firmly push him on the defense. And you think, whoa, maybe this is flat. And even in that first things, I think maybe Rickleton clips Stark for 4, but Markram faced the first ball and just leaned on it and just bunted it back with authority. And that, I remember in the crowd, people looked at each other like, whoa, that seems flat. That seems authoritative. That seems like maybe suddenly, just from one forward defense, 280 didn't feel like a lot. And I just think that's why Test cricket's so good, isn't it? Because it's just this tiny little thing, inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, that is just part of the mosaic of this amazing thing.
No, absolutely. And just a quick word on David Bedingham, actually. 66 runs in the game, only dismissed once. And I know South Africa only get to 138 in that first innings, but could have been a lot less if it weren't for Bavuma and Bellingham. Dan, earlier on you described that Lungi Ngidi spell as channeling the spirit of Stuart Broad, who famously was South Africa's bowling consultant before this game.
Yeah.
I must admit, in that Australian second innings, even though Australia were 2 down early on, and they were 40 odd for 2, I thought the game was done. Given their first innings lead, given how fragile the South African top order looked, just given how well Australia themselves bowled, I thought the game was pretty much done until Ngidi bowls the most broad of broad spells, ripping through Australia. And I think from what we saw later that evening through that partnership with Stark and Carey, and what we obviously saw in day 3 with first Hazelwood and Stark with the bat and then South Africa with the bat, I actually don't think conditions were hugely lively for that spell compared to what we'd seen on day 1, where I think the pitch was pretty juicy. It was an amazing spell for a guy whose inclusion was by no means a given. He's been an, at best, peripheral figure of this South African test setup, which people who haven't been following South Africa might not realise, because you look at his numbers and they're really good. But actually, he's only played 2 test matches before this in the last 2.5 years. He hasn't played any first-class cricket aside from that. That was, again, if you're looking for a passage that changed the game, as pivotal as any.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I said the Smith wickets and the Smith drop of Bavuma were pivotal, but yeah, put him on a par. That Ngidi spell, because he was so bad he just was flat, inept. But there's a stat that was doing the rounds that in the first and second innings of Test, so basically Ngidi's his first bowling innings, he averages 32, but his second bowling innings, so innings 3 and 4, he averages 15. So there's just something about this guy who takes a little while to get into games. Questions over his fitness has plagued him his whole career. He has a career average of 23, so he must be doing something right. I know he doesn't play a lot of tests, but in that first innings that he was the first innings he was bowling from the pavilion end, I think. And I really understand the slope at Lords. I try my best, but I've spoken
Sorry,
to
Dan,
English
is there a slope at Lords? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, well, exactly, right. And I think, you know, maybe I feel like obviously a lot's made of it, but maybe it is a thing. But for whatever reason, he changed ends. But even those first 3 overs, he didn't look like he was on it. And then he just got one to, who would it have been? It was before Marnus went out, because Mulder got Marnus, but Ngidi
Jansen got Marnus.
Jansen got Marnus, sorry, but from the other end, bowling from the anyway, Ngidi bowled a ball to Marnus, I think, and it just. He got that shape, and it just managed to hold its line. You think, okay, if he can do a couple more of those, he might trouble them. And he got Smith out. Finally, Smith was unlucky with the review, the luckiest reviewer in the game. And then he was just on it. Then the knees are going, and you know when you're watching a bowler run away from you, you can see the color of his boots behind him. You know that his legs are kind of flicking up. Do you know what I mean? Stokes does this brilliantly. You watch Stokes from behind, and you just see the big red flash of the underside of his boot. And we're seeing that with his Ngidi, and his chest was out and the slips were in. And it felt like an occasion that this man was rising up to. And yeah, it just was one of those, you know, those spells.
Ben, we've barely mentioned Kagiso Rabada, 9 wickets in the game. I know that sort of feels like it's a given with Rabada, but he was so good in both innings. Out of everyone to take 200 test wickets, he's got the best strike rate. That's the number of deliveries on average it takes for a bowler to take a wicket. And it's not just the best, it's the best by some distance. So he takes a wicket every 38.9 balls. The next best is Bumrah at 42. That's half an over on average more incisive than any bowler who's taken 200 test wickets. And in this game, he was up against a champion Australia side. Bowlers-wise, he's competing with the big 3 in that Australian setup, and he outbowls everyone. Although, fair enough, Pat Cummins does take 6 for 28 in the first innings.
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Cummins, because so Cricket vs. Ben Jones wrote a piece in the lead up to the game about these two being sort of like the best 2 after Bumrah of this generation, and like they're similar records and they're very different methods to get there. And you absolutely saw it in this game. Cummins in that spell was you know, typical Pat Cummins, where it's asking the same question every single time, pretty much. You know, he's just that slight back of the length, right in that channel, up at that pace that means that you can get some indecision going, and the pressure is so intense. Rabada's he's not that, but he does have he's got so many skills that there's no super standout skill. He's not rapid, but he is high 80s. He's not got the James Anderson level of control and mastery of skill and of seam and swing, but he can get it to do something when there's a little bit of help there, and he's not he's got loads of control. But the thing that he does have is that he's always trying to take a wicket, which sounds obvious, but as you saw it kind of in that Australia third evening, there were passages where they were just kind of running up there, bowling, getting through their overs over to the next guy, and then the runs would just kind of tick it down. Rabada wouldn't let that kind of thing happen, and that's why he'd go for runs, because he'd be going full, he'd be trying to bowl the surprise bouncer that gets pulled, he'd be trying to attack the stumps and then going leg side and getting hit for 4. But he's always trying to do that. And I think I don't know how to quantify this stat, but Dan made the point that, or we sort of came up with it together on maybe the second day, that Rabada's percentage of balls that kind of might take a wicket is probably the highest in world cricket. The percentage of possibly wicket-taking balls, not the percentage of truly unplayable balls or the percentage of balls in a good line length, but the percentage of balls that is oh yeah, I can see why that's asking a question. And he's always asking some sort of question. It varies throughout an innings, but yeah, he's an absolute champion, and so good that he got several moments in this game, and then he got to put his feet up at the end of it as well.
Dan, just quickly on Rabada, why is he this good?
I have no idea. As Ben said, we chatted after day one, and we were like, well, the only conclusion I've been able to come to is that he bowls balls that gets wickets, and if it sounds simple, maybe it is. And he makes the game sound so simple. After day one, he came, and his five, he came and gave a presser, and he was talking about. He's like, I asked a question that was doom and gloom. My colleagues from my South African colleagues asked questions that were doom and gloom, and he was like, guys, there's still a test match here. And we're like, okay, mate, yeah, pull the other one. And we said, any words for Lungi Ngidi, who really struggled today? He's like, no, I would just encourage him to eat a steak, drink a milkshake, and watch a movie. And after the game, when we're standing with Rabada on the edge of the pitch, and he had a gold medal around his neck, we were like, so why do you think Lungi turned it around? He's like, because he ate a steak and he drank a milkshake and he watched a movie. And I just think Kagiso Rabada just treats cricket as this. He's a competitor. There's no doubt about it, and you see that on the pitch. But I think I think in his mind he's been able to simplify not only the broader game and his place within it, but the craft of bowling. And it's like, I don't need to be a 10 out of 10 at any one variable. I can be 8 out of 10 at every variable, and if I do that enough times, I will get wickets. And it's probably a very unsatisfying answer, Yas, to your question about what makes this guy so good. Ben Jones of CricViz will probably have a much better read on it. But for me, he's just a bowler who bowls a lot of good balls, and they get wickets, and they get good batters out. And in the modern times, I think batters are less equipped to keep out more good balls than maybe they used to, for whatever reason. Well, the reasons we know, but yeah, that strike rate is outrageous. And every time he had the ball in his hand, you just thought they could do it. They if he's bowling, there's a chance.
Yeah, I think the Anderson comparison, I think, is quite interesting. To me, he is a quicker, more attacking version of Anderson in terms of just how many skills he has and so many different ways of asking questions. In the section with Butch, I said that there actually aren't that many guys who are both wobble seam bowlers but also swing bowlers, and I think Rabada is just so attacking, but he's got the skills to back up that attacking intent, and he's also someone who, this isn't the first time that he got on the honours board at Lords. One of the many quirks of the modern schedule is actually just how infrequently South Africa have travelled to England in the last few years, and I think we've been robbed of a Bumrah in Australia over the winter series for Rabada in England. Rabada first comes to England in 2017 when he's 22, comes for that 3 test match series in 2022, takes a 5 for at Lords when South Africa beat England, but that was a very weird series in terms of how short 2 of those 3 test matches were. But South Africa haven't come to England for a significant long series since 2017. And I think that English conditions in particular really suit him. And I think, he's just an absolute king in terms of being able to get that ball to talk. Ben, Aiden Markram, 136 off 207. You sort of called it before the run chase started. Totally majestic innings. And I've always thought that with Markram, it's a crime that a player that good averages in the mid-30s. But it doesn't matter now. When he retires, he has an innings that will be mentioned in the first line of every write-up of his career that befits his talent. A fourth innings 100 in the Lord's final to get South Africa over the line. It was special on paper, but also just special to watch.
Yeah, absolutely, all of that. And I guess, I don't know, what do you say about him? I guess the things with him is that it looks sometimes like it comes so easy, like it all makes sense. Like even just the way he kind of looks as he's walking to the crease, the collar's always popped exactly. The shirt always fits really well. The bat just looks really good in the hands. And when he started in Test cricket, that was how it played out. I think his first year he makes 400s, I think, a few other 90-plus scores. And then he goes, several years without one. He's averaging 20, 25, I think, for a 4-year period. And that would have been like one of the first times, I think, in his life really, that he would have kind of struggled with that. And that is something that can set a guy back. He gets dropped. He's actually dropped. He talked about the 2022 series in England. That's when he was dropped for what felt like it could be a long time at that point, because he'd been given quite a lot of rope, recalled, and then not quite justified it, and then dropped again. And it was actually the new head coach. So the new head coach, his first series was against West Indies, start of 2023. He has two big decisions to make, really. He makes Bavuma captain, and he makes Markram opener over Sarel Irvi, who had been the incumbent at the time. Markram makes 100 in the first game of that series. Bavuma makes a pair, and in the second game makes a second Test 100, obviously having gone 22 half century or 21 half centuries and 100 before that point. So he's got the backing there as well, and we've seen the kind of the ridiculous things he can do before. Like, had he not had this innings, he would have still have had that innings against India last year, which was Wisden's Test innings of 2024. And okay, South Africa lost that game, but that was an innings that kind of confirmed that this guy is special, actually, that he can do things that others can't, especially against pace bowling. And I think now, sure, at the moment he averages whatever it is, 36, 37. I think he ends his career with average, or at least it climbs up to 45 at one point, and he's going to go and kick on from here, because it's always made sense. And in this innings, I guess the thing is that he has the shots, he has the timing, he's got the technique, but in this innings he just kind of pieced it all together with just a beautiful temperament. I think Ian Bishop called it phenomenally responsible, which kind of sounds like it shouldn't really be two words that go together, and yet that was what this was. It was like, it wasn't a blockathon, it wasn't a counter-attack, it was just a normal Test innings in kind of the most abnormal of circumstances. And actually the other shot I'd pick out was when it was getting just a little bit tense and Steph got to the second new ball with still a tiny bit of work to do, and then he plays that shot through mid-wicket off Josh Hazelwood first ball, and you're like, that is just an absurd shot to pick out at this moment in time when the new ball's been doing so much all game, and he's just like, no, I'm Aiden Markram, this is my moment, and he does that.
There are noises that crowds make that are different in run chases. So one of them is just a boundary in a run chase. It's just a slightly different noise to normal. There's a different noise still when there's a boundary, when the crowd for the first time knows the game's won. And that shot of Hazelwood was that boundary.
That's right.
And Dan, on that fourth morning, I felt a bit sick. So I have no idea how you felt. South Africa needed 69, 8 wickets in hand. And I thought, even obviously on paper, they are overwhelming favourites to win the game at this point. I thought the way Markram played the fourth morning was so important, because he was the only guy that was able to score it. So Australia, and we'll get to them later, don't worry. Australia felt like, for the first time in a while, that they had understood how to control the tempo of the game, and South Africa was scoring very, very slowly. Markram was the guy who could get the odd ball away. And then also, when Bedingham comes in, there was a period where Markram barely faced the ball, but every time he faced the ball, he got a single. He hit 9 singles in a row when he was on strike. So that ability to turn the strike over, but also to find the boundary when South Africa were going nowhere was crucial. It was just an amazing innings that basically had everything.
Phenomenal. One of the best innings by South African. And if you want to even take out the context of the World Test Championship final and that it was at Lords and there was a title on the line of the Chokers tag and all that weight of history, that's Aiden Markram, and I want to talk about him in a little bit. Just the fact that it came in the fourth innings against that attack. Like any context, you put that in any pitch, first test of a 5-match series, the last test of a series that has already been lost, just that innings against that attack, what means that, as one of you said, I don't know if Ben said, it's the first line, and then he writes up on his history. And it's interesting what Ben said about he'll go on to average 45, and maybe he will and maybe he won't. But what's different about Aiden Markram now is I like to think that he's in this third chapter of his story. So I interviewed him for a big Cricket Monthly magazine piece after that summer that you spoke about, Yas, where he made all those runs. He got a fourth innings ton against Australia. He got 150 at the Wanderers. He got a 90 against India, made runs. And once again, clearly I didn't learn my lesson as a young journalist, but I picked him out for greatness, but me and everyone else, right? He told me he had ambitions to be the best batter in the world. He wanted to average 55. He wanted to win World Cup. He didn't even talk about winning World Cups. He just wanted to be the best batter in the world. That was his ambition. That was the first chapter. The second chapter was all about struggle, and he couldn't handle it. He was a guy who would beat himself up. Him spooning to cover wasn't just him playing a bad shot. It meant that he was a bad person, that he didn't deserve happiness. He really internalized failure. He broke his hands in India, punching a wall after going out for a duck. I think even making a pair in that test. He punched his hand. He punched the wall, broke his hand, missed the series, came back, couldn't struggle. This was the second chapter. At Lords, with the gold medal around his neck, he told us that he doesn't even care about averages anymore. He just wants to win stuff for South Africa. And maybe that's freeing for a guy like that who's been so obsessed with who he is. And like Ben says, he looks good. His biceps aren't too big, but they're big enough. And his chest isn't too big, but it fits the shirt well. And his jawline isn't too offensive, but it's really handsome. And like he just kind of ticks all the boxes, right? He plays like one cover drive where he holds the pose and it just pings off Cummins or Hazelwood. And it's like, oh my God, this guy's a dream. But now I think he's freed himself of what he represents, and he just wants to do stuff for his country. And yeah, I think that's what you saw.
I think just a couple of things on Markram finally. I think one, weirdly, it felt, I don't know if you guys watch any golf, but I'm not a big golf fan, but still watch the odd thing. It felt, for me, a little bit similar to when McIlroy won the Masters, in terms of there's a player who's really good, who you know is capable of basically doing anything, but hasn't quite done absolutely everything, or the thing that you know that his talent deserves. And I also found his celebration of getting to 3 figures quite interesting in just how calm it was. He respectfully acknowledges the applause. He takes off his helmet because he has to. But there was no wild release of emotion that must have been building up.
He did actually. I think about 2 overs later, he started crying. He started struggling to hold back tears in a bit of a quiet way. But also the thing with McIlroy is that McIlroy, I mean, he'd play one good shot in that final day of the Masters and then stick one in the water, and then he'd play a great.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't Markram until he picked out cover mid wicket with a good catch at head, which also Markram smoked that.
Yeah, it's an amazing catch.
A meter either side and it's 4 runs. It was so perfect. Although he did edge Cummins between keeper and slip, didn't he? There was one nervy shot that I can remember, but otherwise he was faultless.
Yeah, there was one that spun back as well. I think with that centre celebration, Bavuma base celebrates first. There's actually a picture we can see Bavuma's jumping, and he's still not quite at Markram's height, but he's jumping, and Markram's kind of got the clenched fist close in. And we haven't even mentioned, I feel like at some point we need to talk about more about Bavuma as well, who not just a 60-odd in that second innings, but with an injured hamstring that it seemed like maybe kind of slightly eased up through the course of the day. I don't know, but like he was having to hobble pretty much every single he was taking, and would have been in pain. And there were discussions as well over, I can't remember, was it at the tea break maybe, or just about whether they retire Bavuma, get someone in who can run. And actually it's Markram as much as Bavuma who's saying like, no, I want him out there because we've got this partnership going. This is what is going to do it for us. And just an amazing thing for him as well. That kind of epitomised him in some ways. His battle, how much he's had to grind. Grind and so many things. Obviously, as in terms of the playing the game, but also the circumstances outside that being questioned. Both from outside of South Africa being questioned. The team, do they deserve to be there? And then from inside, perhaps earlier in his career, he's now fully established as like the best batter in that team, really. But all the stuff he's had to overcome as a player who they said didn't deserve his spot, that kind of thing. To have this as captain and Dan will be able to talk better about it, but he must now rank alongside, I guess, Sia Khaleesi as one of South Africa's most important sporting figures, basically.
Yes, that's such a big question, and all of us South African writers would have written about is this the Sia Khaleesi moment. And in the matchday program at Lord's, when I interviewed Bavuma for it, I asked him, "Will this be your Sia Khaleesi moment?" And he said yes, because what is he going to say? No, it's not going to be. But as I'm sure I said on your pod, and actually I did say it on your pod, that I don't think this is going to resonate with on the same level as the Khaleesi moment, because of the sport, because of the team, because of the way cricket kind of is not accessible to a lot of people. But yeah, he Bavuma in the post-match presser wasn't asked it. He brought it up himself. He said, "I hope now I can be seen as more than just a black cricketer, that I can be seen as more than just a black captain, that I can be seen as a triumphant captain." I don't think he's worn the black captaincy thing as comfortably as Khaleesi has worn it, because for such a long time it was a thing that weighed Bavuma down. Now he is more comfortable with it, but he never had that run up to this moment where, oh, wouldn't it be great? He was always called a quota and a political selection, and a guy didn't deserve there. And so was Khaleesi. But the thing with rugby is that it's objective, right? I might think that Khaleesi doesn't belong there, but someone else might. Bavuma had an average next to his name. He had a hundreds column next to his name. There was no arguing against those. So you could say, oh, well, I think he's very good. And someone could say, well, he's clearly not. I hope this now finally, South Africans can finally realize that not only is he an inspirational leader, although not a very good tactical leader. I thought he let actually Stark and Hazelwood drift a little bit too much. But he's just a good player. He's a really, really good batter. He turns singles well. He drives well. He's difficult to bounce because of how short he is. That if you get it wrong, he pulls you. He's got a great pull. He cut his teeth in the high felt where it's very bouncy. He's actually a really good player, and he averages 60 over the last 2 years. I hope we can talk about him without the broader context and just talk about what a gun he's become.
Yeah, no, his runs in this game are so important, and you're right to point out that his recent record. In fact, it's not just his recent record. His record for a very long time now has just been very good. So if you go back to the start of 2021, he averages more than 40 in every calendar year that he's played. He's averaged more than 50 in the last 3 years. And I know that he's not scored a huge number of hundreds, but he has been an incredibly consistent batter for South Africa. And that career average now is pretty much 40. We have a predominantly English listening base. So I'm sure it will pain our listeners for us to spend a few minutes on what went wrong with Australia. Ben, I thought, and this is a very, very basic point, they looked old. They looked old in the field in terms of just the energy, certain fielders actually chasing the ball. But also, Butch and I talked about there was a listlessness about Australia on that third evening when Markram and Bavuma took the game away from them. There were fielders out, they were milking them, they were going at 3-4 runs and over without taking a risk, without scoring many boundaries. And I think that's partly tactical from Cummins and co. But I also think that was a reflection of the physicality of this Australian attack, in that they weren't able to come back for spells early enough for what the game situation required. You had Lyon wheeling away from one end, but it felt like Australia couldn't really attack with one of the big three seamers at the other end. You had Head bowling a little bit, you had Bo Webster bowling a little bit, and I thought he was extremely ineffective with the ball in this game. And it felt like there hadn't actually been that many overs bowled by the Aussies in the game, yet they still had to be rested, I suppose, at that point. And that the physicality comes into it there as well. And then you also have the whole piece around them trying to shoehorn players into that top 6 in spots they're not usually used in. And that really didn't work out in this game. One-off test match, weird things happen, sure. But equally, it feels like they have been so reliant on this group of players, and they are closer to the end than the beginning of their test careers, and they don't seem to be as adaptable as maybe this side should be, given how successful they've been.
Yeah. So to take your first point first on the bowlers, and particularly that third evening, I think there's also the question of over rates actually kind of comes into it here, where they're looking for rest kind of almost in spells. They're deliberately not rushing through overs, not trying to get round quickly. And I think that means that they can, in this instance, it felt like they struggled to create intensity because of that they were like, it's not like they could, feel like there was no let up, because actually, even if there wasn't let up in the scoring, there was, you were just having a bit of time to breathe. I think they would have benefited, from just being able to get through them a bit quicker, which they weren't able to do in that instance. I think on the bowling side, if we're just looking further down the line, I think the transition, even though you're right, there's still that there's levels of age within that team. I think that and the bowling transition will, I think, kind of take care of itself, even though it's not totally clear who the guys coming through are. But I think that there are enough sort of candidates there. They might not form an attack that is, up there with the greatest quartets of all time, but I think Stark's he's the oldest. It might be that he leaves the end of the Ashes, say, and then Hazelwood leaves a bit after that, and then Pat Cummins actually he's 32. He could still have a few years in, having also had that long stretch where he wasn't bowling that much.
So very, very quickly on the age of the seamers, I'm not saying that any of them are over the hill. I think they all bowled very well at different points in this game. It's more that if you have 3 main seamers who are all approaching, Stark turns 36 at the start of next year, then if you don't have a bowling all-rounder who you really trust as well, and I don't think they did trust Webster with the ball in this game hugely, then those guys have to do a lot of bowling, and that's a very different question for them now compared to, they were literally the Australia attack in the 17-18 Ashes, and I think that's the thing. It's not necessarily that they are declining skill-wise, it's just, can they be as physically relentless as they were before? Sorry, what you were going to say about their batters?
Yeah, but I think equally also, there'd be a nagging fear with the Australian selectors that those guys, you might say, lose 3 at the same time, and that could still happen, and then they are in a bit of a pickle. The batting is... Yeah, I mean, look, they fudged it for this game, and they kind of would have acknowledged a bit they were fudging beforehand, and definitely had to acknowledge it afterwards, because they pushed Labuschagne up to open. Green obviously couldn't bowl, but had been going so well in Division 2 of county cricket, and he's a very good player that they wanted to pick him as a specialist batter. That then meant that you had a top 3, 2 of whom were kind of not in their right positions, and that cost them as much as anything else. And then you've got Khawaja, who's in this strange situation where he just had a brilliant series in Sri Lanka, and he was bummered by India. That's how he put it, and he was Rabada in this game to the extent that actually Labuschagne took first strike in the second innings. Khawaja, having taken first strike in the first innings and faced 19 of his 20 balls from Rabada, and then got out to the last of those. But he's also, he's I think he's 37, is he? And these things can end quickly. And they now have to make a decision ahead of that Ashes series. They've got, and in a way, the schedule doesn't help them. So they've got a tour of the West Indies that starts pretty soon, or very soon, and they will want to get to learn things in that series, basically. And so they've got this injury to Smith, who might not be fit for that series, or they just might choose not to risk him. So they could easily just kind of get back to a normal batting lineup just without Smith in there. So you go Khawaja, whoever they think the next best opener is, whether that's Constas, McSweeney, Inglis, whoever. Then you go Labuschagne at 3, Green at 4, Head 5, Webster 6. That's the lineup that just makes sense. Or they say, no, we're going to make a statement, and also we're going to just learn some things. And so you drop probably Labuschagne at least, and then you can pick 2 of those guys and find out about them. And then you pick the team that way. I think with Khawaja, I think he should have enough credit in the bank to go out on his terms to begin with, or at least to have the chance in West Indies to show that he can still face a good pace attack. I think there are bowlers there who are kind of not as good as Rabada and Bumrah quite, say Seals in particular, but who are at least on a level, if not a bit better than anything England will have in the Ashes this winter. So I think if he can do it against that attack, then they will feel reasonably confident he can get through that Ashes series as one of their best two openers. Labuschagne, he's still young enough that if they do drop him and say you're going to have to go and make some runs and prove your form again before you come back, he can do that. So I think that's the way they'll go, is keep Khawaja for the moment, drop Labuschagne, and then find out if Constance, McSweeney, Inglis are ready to sort of crack Test cricket on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and Cummins actually speaking to the press over the weekend did suggest that this might be a pretty good opportunity for Australia to hit the reset button at the start of a new WTC cycle. And I guess there's also like a slight cultural difference there in terms of how the Aussies view the WTC compared to England. I think England, there's absolutely no way they would have a reset this close to an Ashes series, but Australia very openly talking about this might be the time to do it, and that Smith injury, as you say, might actually help them have a look at one more guy than they otherwise might be able to. Dan, just finally on Australia from your perspective, was there anything about them that surprised you in this game?
Well, no, not before the start of the game. I definitely think that was the team I was expecting. Cricket's so brutal, isn't it? It's so unforgiving. It's not like football or rugby where, oh, okay, we've selected the guy to be our holding midfielder, or we've selected the guy to be our blindside flank, and it's not working. Let's change it. They were stuck with Labuschagne as their opener. They were stuck with Green as their number 3. They were stuck with a pace attack that, once the deck flattened out, lacked a guy who could kind of bowl long, hard overs, just to kind of keep things a little tighter. Stark went for almost 5 in the second innings. Even Hazelwood was going at 3.5, which is super expensive. I think Cummins was in the 4s. So yeah, when they were on top, they never looked old. But then when they weren't on top rather, then they did suddenly look old. And that's sort of cricket, right? It's almost like we judge these things in retrospect. When they're unfolding, there's almost like an inability for teams sometimes to reassess. I mean, could they have changed the batting order in the second dig after it didn't work? But then maybe that's being too reactive to just one innings, a small sample size. So I don't know if anything surprised me, but obviously now looking at the team with hindsight, they got it wrong. Clearly they got it wrong. The bowling, could Boland have played? I mean, he's a bit younger than that trio, but then if he did play instead of Hazelwood, they would have been up in arms about, oh, well, why are you not playing a guy who's one of the all-timers, or certainly of the modern era, who's fit? Why are you not playing him? Cam Green had been making a ton of runs. He looked primed and ready to bat a 3. I mean, if he made 100, it wouldn't have been the most surprising thing in the world. Yeah, I think Australia are better than most teams. Yes, Cummins did say the reset, but I was talking to Adam Collins yesterday, and he kind of gave the suggestion that Australia won't panic. Maybe it's so hard to say. I mean, it is a one-off test. If this was a series, even a 3-match series, because okay, the Marnus experiment has failed, the Cam Green experiment has failed, but if there was another test, who's to say that Marnus and Cam wouldn't score 250 together and both make tons? We just don't know. So the West Indies series will be interesting. I'll be curious to see if it is the big reset that Cummins promised. Smith's injury does help them. It gives them a chance to at least tweak something. Yeah, so I guess all eyes on what they do. I don't really know how to read it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think the only thing I'd say is that even if the change isn't wholesale, it is interesting from an outsider's perspective, looking at an Australian top 7 just after a WTC final, 5 months away from the start of the Ashes. And I think you can only hang your hat on 3 of the top 7 playing, Smith, Head and Carey. I think there's question marks over Khawaja, question marks over Labuschagne.
Even Khawaja?
I think so. Just because it can end so quickly, and I know he got huge runs in Sri Lanka, but he is 38. I think he turns 39 during the Ashes. He had a poor BGT, albeit against Bumrah, and his failure here was against Rabada. Fair enough, but it can end very quickly for players at that age. I think also it doesn't help that he's not the best around the field. I think that adds to the perception that he's maybe over the hill or approaching the top of the hill, or whatever point of the hill that you are done by. I think there are questions over Labuschagne. There have been for a while. Questions over Cam Green batting in the top 4. I know he had a really good mini spell at 4 before, but it's not entirely clear how he fits into the side at the moment when everyone's fit. And Smith's obviously a lock when fit at 4, Head's a lock at 5, Carey's a lock at 7, and Webster, I know that the Aussies were excited by the start of his career, but I thought he was extremely unconvincing. It was one of those innings, I thought, where in the first innings, even when he got the runs, where he was in for long enough for his technical flaws to be on show. And he's clearly someone who fits the Australian mould of a number 6, that when the opposition attack tires a little bit, he can really attack them and make them pay. But he looked incredibly vulnerable at the start of both of his innings. He was basically 8 for 2 himself in the first innings with the LBWs that went against him. Out LBW again to a ball that came into him in the second innings. And with the ball, he was not that effective. So I think even though he started well, I can see how there's question marks over him quite soon. So yeah, it's an odd place for Australian cricket to be. But anyway, let's leave it there for today. Dan, it's been so good having you on both before and after the Test match. Let's get you on in the summer when South Africa aren't playing. I'm interested to hear what you think about other teams. And yeah, cheers for your time both. That's it for today's show. Discover the future of electric vehicles at an exclusive event at a Kia dealership near you. Be among the first to experience 2 new vehicles joining the existing Kia electric range. The sporty Kia EV4 and the spacious SUV, the new Kia EV5. 2 of the most anticipated launches of the year. Explore cutting-edge design, talk to EV experts, and discover what driving electric really means. Claim your space at an event near you through the link in the description.